Outside the city of Nishapur, there stands a pyramid. Not carved from stone. Not erected as a monument to some forgotten king. A pyramid built from severed human heads, stacked in careful rows, sorted by category. Men in one section. Women in another. Children in a third. The people who constructed it felt nothing personal toward the dead. This was administration. The commander who ordered Nishapur erased needed verification. Every resident confirmed. Every count accurate. Every head accounted for. Nishapur was not where this began. It was not where it ended. It was simply the place where the method of counting changed. What you are about to hear is the complete story of how the most powerful empire in Central Asia was taken apart, city by city, population by population, in less than 2 years. But the part most people never stop to consider is this. It did not have to happen. Not a single city had to burn. Not a single canal had to be destroyed. Not a single child had to die. All of it, every last consequence, flows from one decision made by one man who could not imagine losing. In 1218, a trade caravan set out from the east. 450 merchants. Camels weighed down with Chinese silk, gold, silver, musk, and fine cloth worth a fortune by the standards of any era. Traveling under the personal seal of a ruler most of the Western world had never encountered. The message traveling with that caravan was straightforward. I consider you my most valued neighbor. Let commerce move between us. Let friendship be established between our peoples. The man receiving that message was Shah Muhammad II, commander of more than 400,000 soldiers, self-declared shadow of God upon the earth, ruler of the Khwarazmian Empire, the dominant power stretching from the Aral Sea down to the Persian Gulf. He had options. Accept the caravan. Profit from the trade. Build the relationship. Refuse diplomatically. He chose neither. What he chose instead would set off the most destructive military campaign the medieval world had ever witnessed. And before this story is finished, the population of Central Asia will have fallen by an estimated 75%. That figure is not an exaggeration constructed for effect. Persian chroniclers, Chinese records, and Arab historians writing independently of one another all arrive at numbers in that range. 75%. Before we go any further, if you are watching Crimson Archive for the first time, this is what we do here. We go into the history that most channels summarize in 3 minutes, and we stay there until you understand not just what happened, but why it could not have gone any other way once certain choices were made. Hit like and subscribe now. It costs you nothing, and it means we can keep making these. The caravan crossed into Khwarazmian territory and reached a border city called Otrar. The governor of Otrar was a man named Inalchuk. His position was a political appointment. He was the Shah's uncle by marriage, placed there as a reward for family connection rather than any demonstrated ability to govern. When he saw the caravan arrive, something shifted in him. What exactly happened next varies depending on which account you follow. Persian sources claim he accused the merchants of being spies. Mongol records suggest he simply wanted what they were carrying. Some Chinese accounts indicate the Shah himself may have authorized the seizure. What no source disputes is the outcome. Inalchuk took everything. Then he arrested every merchant. Then he had all of them killed. 450 men, traveling under a sovereign seal, executed in a border city by a provincial governor acting on greed, or orders, or paranoia. The record is not clear on which. One merchant survived. He made it back east and delivered the news to the man whose seal those merchants had been carrying. And here is where the history pivots in a direction most retellings completely miss. That man did not immediately march west with an army. He sent ambassadors. Not soldiers. Ambassadors. The demand they carried was precise and, by the standards of the era, remarkably restrained. Hand over the governor of Otrar. Acknowledge that the massacre was not authorized. Allow the man responsible to face justice. 450 men traveling under a ruler's protection had been slaughtered. Under the laws governing the steppe, that alone was already sufficient justification for total war. And yet an alternative was being offered. One man. One governor. One political relative who had overstepped. Give him up and this ends here. The ambassadors arrived at the Shah's court, and Muhammad II made the decision that would end everything he had built. He did not surrender in Alchuk. He did not negotiate. He did not even send a formal refusal. He executed the lead ambassador. The remaining envoys he had mutilated. Their beards were set on fire. Their heads were shaved. Among Mongol and Turkic peoples, this was not merely an insult. It was a deliberate act of degradation, a mark placed on a man to signal his subjugation. Then he sent them back on foot across the steppe to deliver the message in their own bodies. When those envoys arrived back at the Eastern Court, the entire camp saw them. The burned faces, the shaved heads, the humiliation made visible on living men. The Persian historian Juvayni, who wrote within a generation of these events, recorded what came next. The man who received them walked alone to a hilltop. He remained there for 3 days. He spoke to no one. When he came back down, he said one thing. "It is decided." That man was Genghis Khan. To understand what the Shah had just done to himself, you need a clear picture of who Genghis Khan actually was in 1218. Not the myth. Not the later legend. The actual man and the actual army he had spent his entire adult life constructing. His birth name was Temujin. His father was poisoned by Tartar rivals when Temujin was 9 years old. His own clan abandoned his family on the steppe with nothing. His older half-brother hoarded food while the rest of them starved. Temujin killed him with an arrow. He may have been 12 years old. He was later captured by a rival tribe and held prisoner with a wooden yoke locked around his neck. He escaped at night, submerged himself in a frozen river and held completely still with only his face above the waterline until his captors rowed past him in the dark. By 30 he had built a coalition through personal loyalty, calculated marriages, and one practice that was almost unheard of in steppe politics, promoting men based on ability rather than bloodline. By 40 he had destroyed every rival confederation on the Mongolian plateau. In 1206, a grand assembly gave him his title. Genghis Khan. Universal ruler. What separated his military from anything the Khwarazmian Empire had faced before was not numbers. It was architecture. Every unit ran on a decimal structure. Groups of 10, companies of 100, regiments of 1,000, divisions of 10,000. Commanders were selected by performance. Discipline was without exception. If one man deserted from a group of 10, the entire group was executed. Retreat without a direct order carried the same consequence. His soldiers had trained for years on coordinated movements using flags and signals across distances of miles. They could sustain 60 miles of riding a day for weeks without a supply train, carrying dried meat and fermented mare's milk. And for the decade before 1218, they had been doing something that would matter enormously in what was coming. They had been systematically besieging walled cities in northern China, learning how fortifications failed, absorbing Chinese engineers who understood catapults, battering rams, and incendiary weapons. This was not a nomadic force that had never seen a city wall. This was a professional military that had spent 10 years learning exactly how to bring them down. That was what was riding west. The Shah knew war was coming. He had time. He had 400,000 soldiers. He made a decision that looked rational on paper and turned out to be the single worst strategic choice of the campaign. He distributed his army across his major cities, placing large garrisons behind high walls, forcing the Mongols to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. What this actually created was a situation where no individual garrison was strong enough to face the full Mongol army in the field, and no mobile reserve existed to reinforce any city that came under pressure. Every city was completely isolated. Every city was on its own. The Shah had also spent years replacing experienced military commanders with men he personally trusted, which was not the same thing as men who could fight. His generals had loyalty. Many of them did not have recent combat experience. He had also broken publicly with his own mother, Turken Khatun, who controlled the eastern provinces and maintained her own network of loyalists. That fracture inside the empire would cost him at exactly the moment he could least afford it. The empire looked impenetrable from the outside. From the inside, it was held together by revenue and fear, and the force approaching understood precisely how to dismantle both. Genghis Khan brought somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 men. He divided them into multiple columns, but not in any pattern the Shah anticipated. The most visible force, commanded by his sons Chagatai and Ojibday, marched directly toward Otrar. This was deliberate. It was meant to be seen. It was meant to draw attention to the obvious line of attack. A second force under his son Jochi moved north along the Syr Doria, threatening the empire's northern edge. And a third force, the one Genghis Khan led personally, did something that should not have been physically possible. He moved his army through the Kyzylkum Desert, over 100,000 square miles of sand, scrub, and salt flats. Summer temperatures past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. No roads. No reliable water sources. No record of any large army ever crossing it. The Shah had not fortified the approach from the Kyzylkum because he did not believe an army could survive crossing it. The Mongols crossed it. They emerged behind the Shah's entire defensive line, in territory the empire considered its interior, and they came out west of the Syr Doria. They appeared at Bukhara. Otrar was the first to fall. The siege ran 5 months. When the walls broke, the garrison was wiped out. Inalchuk, the governor who had seized the caravan, who had executed 450 merchants and started every single thing that followed, was taken alive. The sources disagree on the details of what happened to him next. One account describes molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. Whether that is literal or an embellishment added later, the meaning was the same. He had been first. He was treated accordingly. Bukhara had been a center of Islamic scholarship for 3 centuries. Its population was over 300,000. Its mosques were known from Cairo to Delhi. Its scholars had been working on astronomy, algebra, and medicine for longer than most European kingdoms had existed. The garrison numbered around 20,000 soldiers. When the Mongol army appeared from the desert, the garrison commanders understood immediately that they could not hold the outer city. They pulled back into the citadel, the fortified inner section, and left the civilian population outside the walls with no protection whatsoever. Genghis Khan entered Bukhara without a siege. The outer gates were opened by residents who had no soldiers left to defend them. According to Juvayni, the Khan rode to the main mosque. When told it was a house of God, he had his horses stabled inside it. Then he addressed what remained of the population. The exact wording of what he said has been filtered through multiple translations and a generation of retellings, but the substance is consistent across the sources. He told them their Shah had committed a crime. He told them this was the result. He told them their suffering belonged to Muhammad, not to him. The citadel held for several days. The Mongols drove prisoners from the surrounding area forward as shields during their assaults, forcing the garrison to fire arrows and drop stones onto their own countrymen. When the citadel finally broke, every soldier inside was killed. Then Bukhara burned. Whether the fires started deliberately or by accident is a question the sources argue over. What is not arguable is the result. The city that had stood as a center of learning for 3 centuries was gone. Libraries burned. Texts that existed in no other copy burned. Mosques built in the 9th century burned. Survivors were sorted. Skilled workers, metalsmiths, engineers, weavers, were separated and sent east to be absorbed into the Mongol labor system. Young men were conscripted to be used in the next assault. Everyone else was released into open countryside with no food, no shelter, and nothing they had owned. A merchant who returned to Bukhara years afterward wrote that he could not identify where the city had stood. The army moved immediately to Samarkand. If Bukhara had been famous, Samarkand was legendary. 500,000 people. Walls 40 feet high. Irrigated fields in every direction fed by canals that had been engineered centuries before. Travelers who had seen every major city in the known world described it as the most beautiful place they had encountered. It had 110,000 soldiers behind those walls. It also had a population that had heard, in detail, what had just happened to Bukhara. The Mongols arrived and did what they had spent a decade learning to do in northern China. They sealed the city completely. Nothing moved in or out. Supply lines cut. Communication severed. On the 3rd day, a large portion of the garrison sortied out to engage in open ground. The Mongol light cavalry retreated, drawing them further and further from the walls. Then heavy cavalry closed from both flanks and the sortie was destroyed. Thousands of Samarkand's best soldiers died in open ground within sight of their own city. Inside, morale disintegrated. On the fifth day, a faction of Turkish soldiers within the garrison, men who had no personal loyalty to the Shah, opened the gates. The Mongols entered. The remaining garrison fell back to the citadel with roughly 1,000 men. It lasted days. Every soldier inside was killed. The civilian population was marched outside. Artisans were separated and sent east. 30,000 young men were levied for the next siege. The rest were assessed for ransom. Those who could not pay were released with nothing into the countryside. Then the irrigation network was destroyed. Not damaged. Not partially disrupted. Systematically wrecked. The canals were filled in. The headworks were dismantled. This was not incidental to the assault. It was a separate operation, conducted deliberately, because without irrigation the agricultural foundation that sustained 500,000 people simply ceased to function. Samarkand would not recover its pre-invasion population for over 600 years. Some historians argue it never fully did. While his cities were falling one after another, the Shah fled. Muhammad II abandoned his capital. He abandoned his army. He abandoned his empire. He moved west with a small personal retinue, and Genghis Khan sent the two commanders the Mongol army trusted above all others to find him, Jebe and Subutai. Their orders were simple. Find the Shah. Do not return until he is located or confirmed dead. They took 20,000 riders and went. They chased Muhammad across his own territory, through Khwarazmian, through northern Iran, through regions that were still nominally under his rule. At every city they reached they delivered the same terms. Open your gates, supply us, cooperate and your people survive. Resist and you do not. Some cities opened their gates. Those survived. Reduced, taxed, stripped, but standing. Others chose to fight. Nishapur chose to fight. More than that, Nishapur killed a Mongol general during the siege. Tokuchar, who was Genghis Khan's son-in-law, died from an arrow fired from the walls. When Nishapur finally fell, the order that came down was not for a standard sacking. It was for the complete removal of every living thing within the city walls. Every man, every woman, every child, every dog, every cat. The heads were taken and arranged in the pyramids described at the beginning of this account. Men in one section, women in another, children in a third. The Persian sources place the death toll at over 1.5 million. That specific number is almost certainly inflated. But the destruction of Nishapur is confirmed by enough independent sources that the basic fact is not seriously disputed. The city was emptied of life. The Shah kept running. He crossed into the Caspian region. Governors who had pledged loyalty to him turned him away. Generals who had served under him deserted. His treasury was gone. His family was scattered, many of them already in Mongol captivity, including his mother Turken Khatun, who would remain a prisoner for the rest of her life. In December of 1220, Muhammad II died on a small island in the Caspian Sea. Alone. Without a court. Without an army. Without an empire. The man who had styled himself the Second Alexander, who had commanded 400,000 soldiers and called himself the Shadow of God, died of pleurisy, dressed, according to one source, in borrowed rags because he had nothing clean left to wear. The empire he had ruled 18 months earlier, the dominant power from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf, no longer functioned in any meaningful sense. Merv, one of the largest cities in the world at that time, with a population reportedly exceeding 500,000, fell and a count of the dead was attempted afterward. The counting took 13 days. Urgench, the Khwarazmian capital, was so thoroughly demolished that the Mongols redirected the Amu Darya River to flood whatever remained of it. Balkh, one of the oldest inhabited cities on Earth, a place that had served as a center of Buddhist and then Islamic civilization for over 1,000 years, surrendered without resistance. It was destroyed anyway. When the Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta passed through more than a century later, he found ruins and nothing else. No inhabited structures. No functioning city. A place that had opened its gates, that had not resisted, that had done everything the terms demanded, still gone, still empty, 100 years on. The agricultural infrastructure of Transoxiana, canal systems that had required centuries to construct, was gone. Agricultural output across the region would not return to pre-invasion levels until the 20th century. Some scholars argue it has never completely recovered. The total death toll cannot be calculated with any certainty. Estimates for the Khwarazmian campaign specifically run between 10 and 15 million. Some place it higher. One analysis of the Mongol conquests as a whole, of which this campaign was only the opening movement, concludes that the global human population fell by roughly 11%. The Khwarazmian Empire did not weaken. It did not splinter and get absorbed by neighbors. It was removed from the map. And the line from cause to consequence is not complicated. There was a caravan. There was a governor who wanted its contents. There was a Shah who could have handed that governor over, acknowledged the crime, and preserved everything he had built. He did not. He executed the men who came to ask. And everything that came after, every city reduced to ash, every population scattered, every canal deliberately destroyed, every skull arranged in a pyramid outside a city that would never come back, all of it traces back to that. Not to inevitability. Not to the tide of history. To a man who could not imagine his empire ending. And a man across the desert who had never been given a reason to want anything other than trade. If this is the kind of history you want more of, Crimson Archive is where we do it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us, because the story of what Gebe and Subutai did after the Shah died, the campaign they ran through Persia, the Caucasus, and into the Russian steppe, is a separate account entirely, and it is just as devastating as everything you just heard.